I have some great HOA stories for you today, and you're going to love that title story too. Here's our first one. A very long, twisted tale with multiple updates and a deeply evil HOA. OP sold a parcel of family land to a developer who built a neighborhood. There's now an HOA, and they're aggressively trying to take the rest of OP's land. So, long story short, today has been an absolute crap show. I can't even comprehend where to start. So my parents owned about 30 acres of land in the middle of nowhere, Nebraska, on the outskirts of town. My parents built their house in the late 80s, and that's where I've lived my whole life. My parents passed away, and I inherited the property, and it's all my land, or was my land. Back in 2005, this developer bought up a bunch of neighboring land and wanted to buy my land. I told him I was willing to sell 10 acres furthest from the house, which is the adjoining section to his neighborhood. He asked for 20 acres, and I told him that the second 10 acres would be 3 times the price, and he agreed. We signed the paperwork, and he bought the land, and I was paid for it. End of story, or so I thought. The land sat empty for over a decade, since it took a while for him to sell the plots of land that he made to homebuyers, and his company built houses. From about 2005 to 2012, the land sat empty, and I didn't mind. I still mowed the grass and whatnot to keep it tidy, but I never tried to take the land over or anything. By fall of last year, he had finished the entire area, and there's about 200 homes in that neighborhood. Because of the neighborhood, my 10 acres is now worth about 10 to 20 times what it was originally worth, and the HOA knows that. Since September of 2017, I've had a bunch of angry letters and citations left on my property and in my mailbox. Some of them include having a barn larger than 7 by 7 feet. I actually have a 20 by 40 barn. They said having abandoned vehicles on my property. It's a project car shell that I'm working on. I have the actual chassis in the barn, but it needs quite a bit of work. I bought an old rusted body, and it sits outside and will continue to do so until I can deal with it. Having a non-conforming mailbox, which I still have no idea what the heck this is. Having improper roof tiles, again, no idea. I ignored them, and I told the HOA members that I'm not part of their neighborhood, and therefore have no reason to follow their bullcrap rules. The HOA says since my property values have gone up, I owe back dues from the date I sold my land, before there was even a single house built, and have to correct everything on the list. The back dues are currently $10,200, but they state that if I don't pay by December 31st, 2017, I'll be charged interest that accrued. Again, no idea where they are getting the interest from, but I do believe their HOA fees are around $750 a year. It'll cost me about $15,000 to $20,000 to fix my house. I think it's absolute bullcrap that they can even make me try to do so. First, I went through all the documents I signed, and not a single document from the developer makes any mention of an HOA or my association with it. I have no idea why the HOA is coming after me. I live almost half a mile away from the nearest house that belongs to the neighborhood. The entire neighborhood has its own little custom street signs and lamps. I don't have any of that, so how can they say I'm part of the HOA? They said to either pay up or they will put a lien on my property and take it over. From what I understand, if I pay the $10,000, doesn't that mean I'm admitting to guilt and being forced into the HOA? Update. So I just had an hour-long discussion with the lawyer, and he went through all the documents. He asked if I was sure that that was every document, and I told him that it was, and it was. When I sold all the documents, I put them all in the same folder along with my taxes. He says that there is no chance I'm in the HOA since I didn't sign anything. He let me know that he'd be glad to send them a cease and desist letter to the HOA. I brought up adverse possession, and he suggested that I don't pursue it since I want them to leave me alone rather than to instigate anything bigger. So, for now, he said to not pay anyone or sign anything. He'll mail out the C&D letter today, and he says that if the HOA tries contacting me, I should just tell them to contact him instead. So I think I'm in the clear for now. New update. So I met with the real estate attorney that was referred to me by a Redditor on here, and I did the title search, and I'm in the process of trying to find the old developer's master plans. So far, here's what's been dug up. I sold my land to developer A. He owned the land for about 2 years and then filed bankruptcy and lost the land to the bank. That's when the maintenance of the land went to crap and I was mowing it and taking care of it because the bank didn't care. Bank sold it to developer B, and that is the person that built the current neighborhood. We got in touch with developer B, and he said he was no longer part of the neighborhood, and in fact, the HOA is in charge of the entire area. His company just owned the lots and they sold and built on them for the families, and they have zero say anymore. I asked him about the master plans and if he thought he owned my remaining 10 acres, and he said, absolutely not. The entire neighborhood sits on old land, plus the 20 acres that were purchased from me. So he was helpful, and it was clear he had no wrongdoing. I spoke to the lawyer to see if we could file an adverse possession on the land that I maintained, but he said it would be a waste of time and money, but I was just going to do it to spite the HOA. The title search and everything came up clean. It showed my parents as the previous owners and then me, so no way they could have owned my land. The records go way back, and there is a clear chain of ownership, as my lawyer put it, and it's incontestable. We sent the HOA a cease and desist letter, as well as to stop contacting me unless they have actual signed documents that show I was part of the HOA. They never got back to me. I was out of town and came back last night to my mailbox missing. It was cut clear off of the post with a chainsaw, which was a wooden post with a metal mailbox on top. I told my lawyer this, and he says that that is a big deal and that USPS would send the person to jail. I repurchased an identical mailbox and I set up cameras all over the property. If they try it again, I'll have them on tape. But the biggest thing we uncovered was that we found out what they are planning. Turns out the HOA wants to put in another community playground and a pool and clubhouse, and they need land. They can't expand in any other direction since they're almost on the end of a highway on one side and the other sides are zoned for agriculture. They decided they'd try to take over my land. They have yet to also file a lien on my property, so I'm guessing they were trying to force me into the HOA to make them sell my land below market value. Either way, they showed their hand and now I'm on alert. We filed a complaint with the police regarding the stolen mailbox, and we have a paper trail for that now. It's just a waiting game to see what they do next, I guess. Should I send them a letter saying that I know their plan and there is no way they can get my land? They have their monthly meeting every second Tuesday of the month, so it's in a few days and I'm sure it'll be the topic of discussion. Should I go do it? New update. So I was away for the holidays and I came back on Monday to find my project car was towed out of my driveway. My pond was emptied out and filled with gravel and sand, and it fenced off 2 acres, 2 chains by 1 furlong, of my property closest to the HOA. I immediately called the police and filed a report regarding the stolen property. The car wasn't registered and was just an empty shell, so I have no idea where it is, nor will it be easy to track. It's not worth a lot, maybe like $2,500, but it's a principle of that jerk president of the HOA. I had my lawyer draft up the C&D and sent it nearly 2 weeks ago, and they haven't contacted me in any way except this. I hired a local salvage company to come and tear up the fence this weekend, and they are doing it free of charge since I'm letting them keep the fence to sell as scrap metal or whatever they do with it. My lawyer suggested that I send up a letter demanding payment to fix my pond as it was filled in with gravel and sand. A local landscape company quoted me nearly $8,000 to get the pond back to the way it was, so that is what he suggested that I ask. Oh, and another $2,000 for the loss of use of the pond. The HOA has lawyered up, so I think it's best I no longer post anything on here until it's settled. I don't want to leave you all without some closure since you've been an amazing help. Final update. So, after 6 long months, everything has been resolved. This is my final post regarding this, and I already asked my lawyer if I could post this, and he said, go ahead. So the HOA board got a lawyer to respond to my C&D, and they requested a meeting ASAP with my lawyer present as well. I didn't want to go, but my lawyer suggested me hearing them out at least. At the meeting, I noticed there was the president and some of the higher-ups were not there. The board had no idea what the heck was happening, and their lawyer was just as confused as them. After I laid out my timeline of events, they thanked me for my time, accepted all the financial burden of replenishing my pond, my missing car, they couldn't locate it, and damages. I got checks for everything and got my pond restored back in April and didn't really think much of it. I found out a few weeks ago from the new HOA president. Turns out the old president, treasurer, and someone else had been stealing money from the coffers. They wanted my land to expand and put in a pool, a clubhouse, and so on, just as I saw on their website. The old board fined everyone a ton of money to get all the cash together and to buy my land. Instead, they spent it on themselves. They needed my land somehow, so they thought they could just take over the land that I wasn't using. Long story short, their entire plan fell apart after I fought back and brought to the other members of the HOA's attention what they were doing. From what I've been told, they had to sell their house to pay back the HOA and have since moved away. The HOA has offered me market value for my land, and I do plan on selling it since I don't really use the land for anything and the money isn't bad. I did not file any complaints with the postal inspector or anything since the situation resolved itself. I got a new project car, and for those asking, it was a 98 Supra with a bad engine. My new project is a 67 Fastback that I plan on restoring to look like Eleanor. I got fired. Employers' lawyers should have done their homework. I did. Posted by Zakana. This happened to me about 20 years ago while in college. I'm being deliberately vague because reasons. The background. I got a job basically office sitting on weekends. I showed up at 8 a.m. and every hour I checked over things, handled the occasional phone call, and then left when the 4 p.m. person arrived. Most of the time I read, watched TV, or played games on my laptop. I probably worked no more than 10 minutes of every hour unless something went wrong. It went on like this for years. The pay was decent, holidays were double pay, and I even had opportunities to cover weekday shifts when others were sick. One day, while I was covering the midday shift, my boss asked me to come into his office. He told me that the evening weekday position was going to become available that night. He offered me the position, which I accepted. I was told to punch out and return at 5 p.m. that night. The reason it went down like this should be obvious. Things went okay for a while. I showed up at 4 p.m., did the normal things, and then left at 12 a.m. when my relief arrived. It was a little more work, more call volumes, and so on. And then, after 9 months, things started to go south. The daytime person developed a huge attitude problem and went from a nice person to a total Karen. She would complain about everything I did. For example, one time a system jammed up at a remote site and she called them. 5 hours later, I saw the jam was still there, so I called that site again to see if they were still working on it or if something else was wrong because the woman on our end, who would have been the one to help them, was leaving soon. They did have a problem, and so I hooked them up. My reward for making sure the problem got solved and not having to bother an upper-level employee at home on a Friday just after having left work? I got yelled at because Karen complained that I had apparently ignored her log entry about the issue. My defense was ignored. The boss had me highlight important things on the log to verify that I had read them. Things plodded on for a while with this new normal. I tiptoed around Karen when needed, thankful for the fact that I only had to deal with her for no more than 5 minutes. I did the stupid highlighting thing, and my log entries started getting more and more detailed, even referencing Karen's calls when I had to follow up on an issue that crossed shifts. The firing. The following summer, just after I crossed the year mark, I went on vacation to visit some friends out of state. When I got back, after about a week, my boss came down after everyone had left and had me describe how I did a certain task which involved certain updates. I explained to him how I did it and so forth. He then told me that I had not been doing it at all and that he was firing me. I had transposed the date code of the English file for the French file, which was the previous one. The newest one had already been applied anyways, so nothing was wrong. It was just a reason to get rid of me. So, I left the office. My state is an at-will employment state, which means that I can quit at any time for any reason, and my employer can terminate me at any time for any reason. The only exceptions were state and federal laws, such as race, religion, and so on. I thought I was screwed, so I just started applying everywhere I could. During my job search, I happened to accidentally stumble upon a link about employment law. Out of curiosity, I read it and discovered that my employer had shot themselves in the foot. In the employee handbook, there was a job security clause. What this stated was that they would never lay us off and such if our jobs were eliminated. We would simply be retrained and sent to fill an opening elsewhere in the company. It sounds good, but resulted in them cooking up reasons to fire people to get around it. But their fancy, high-priced lawyers had missed something. In my state's laws, the ones passed by the legislature, I was screwed because of at will. What they neglected was case law, the ones determined by courts. This site cited a case from the state Supreme Court that had ruled that a job security clause waived at will on the employer side, turning it into a just cause relationship. This means that they had to have a real reason to fire me. The revenge. With that in hand, I sought out a lawyer. After my consultation with her, I set about collecting my evidence. My former boss did not realize that I knew more about this program than he did, seeing as I ran the same software on my own computer and laptop. I experimented. The date of the file, which they tried to use against me, is baked into the version. I was able to demonstrate to my lawyer that if I applied the same update over and over, which my former employer stated would change the date every day, would, in reality, display the date of the file. I showed this by backdating my own copy by a year using the update archive available from the vendor. Next, I showed her how the task used to be automated. A script would snag the file and process it every day on its own. A change on the vendor's site broke the script. It was an easy fix, but no one bothered to do it because the guy who wrote it retired. The fix involved deleting 3 characters on one line in the script. The task was also marked as only being a weekday task. In my firing, I was told how important this update was and so forth. If it was so important, why was it not done on weekends or holidays? The vendor pushed out updates on those days too, as I showed my lawyer the one from Christmas morning. And why had the automation not been fixed? With all that in hand, she contacted them. After presenting them with the law, they broke, and all the evidence I had collected, they were forced to settle with me. So, in the end, their fancy high-priced lawyers did not do their homework. I did. Thank you to the wonderful librarians I have known in my life who taught me my information literacy skills. They paid dividends in this case. Update. I never found out how the reaction went down, as the main corporate office that would have dealt with it was in another state, and I never had any contact with those people. I imagine a new handbook was issued before they cut my check though, so I feel bad for those who remained. Karen's fate was sealed about a year later. I saw a Facebook post by a former coworker mentioning that his job with them had ended, so I asked for details. The company experienced a huge loss in revenue. As a result, Karen lost her job as the site I'd worked in was closed. Of about the 50 of us that worked in that office, only 10 or so were moved to another location. Thankfully, most of the ones that I liked were old enough to retire. It did not take a genius to realize that my termination was simply a layoff disguised as a firing. Read your darn emails, Karen. Posted by They Call Me Jaws. I used to work in an office. What kind of work isn't particularly important to the story, so just picture a basic office job. Every January, HR would send an email to all employees with the employee handbook. This included job descriptions, office policies, and so on. Every year since the PDF handbook had been established, it would be named with the year following it to establish it was different than the original and all the other years. Any changes would have updated next to the section in the table of contents so you could see what had changed from the previous year and familiarize yourself with anything new. Now with that background, we will introduce Karen. Karen had been with the company a pretty long time, about 10 years I believe. She was fine at her job, just fine. She would get things done, but not without making everyone else miserable in the process. She would ask questions that had already been answered and basically just waste everyone's time for fun. She was just plain nasty to people and tried as hard as she could to make everyone else stay far away from her. The worst thing about her was she always seemed to be looking for a fight or looking for a reason to complain. She had threatened lawsuits a few times over any small thing, but would always just get over it and drop it because she knew no laws had been broken and it would never go anywhere. She'd comment on how she should sue basically every business she ever went to because she could live off the settlement and retire early, over the smallest issues that you can imagine. She did her job and we never had a valid reason to fire her, especially knowing how lawsuit happy she was, so she stayed. Karen's job description, as per the handbook, called for a bachelor's degree. Karen did not have a bachelor's degree, but had been hired prior to that being a requirement, so she was grandfathered in. One day, a position above hers became open. A guy who we will call Terry had recently completed his master's degree after taking night classes for a few years, and since an internal promotion is typically better than an outside hire, he was chosen for the promotion. Terry had been at the company about 4.5 years and was well liked and great at his job. The new job required a master's degree in its job description, and him being a recent grad, it was a perfect fit, and everyone was happy for him. Everyone but Karen. Since she was constantly looking for something to sue about, she took it as a direct insult that she had not been considered for this promotion that she was not at all qualified for. She immediately cried discrimination and told our boss her lawyer would be in touch. We were all perplexed, since it was very clear that this position required a master's degree, and given that she didn't even have a bachelor's degree, there's no way she could have been hired for the role. What we soon realized was that Karen had saved the original company handbook named Company Handbook and had not bothered to open or save any new editions that were sent in the following 8 years. She just assumed no changes had been made and that it was just sent every year to ensure that all employees had it. If she's bothered to open the file, she would have seen the sections that say updated in the table of contents. Since Karen cried lawsuit a lot, no one expected much of this since it was a ridiculous claim. But sure enough, Karen gives her resignation letter via email, and it is scathing about how she can't bear to work in such a discriminatory environment that would only promote men. When any of the higher-ups try to speak to her about this and clear up the confusion, she basically tells them to F off and to read the dank email. I don't know any more of an explanation. She basically goes full Karen. Not long after, a letter comes in from her lawyer asking for a settlement to avoid a discrimination case. What Karen hadn't realized was that our boss's sister-in-law owned a law firm. She didn't really take on clients herself anymore, and mostly just managed the other lawyers of her firm. She was basically semi-retired. What this meant was that she had plenty of time to review any letters from Karen's lawyer and advise us. Since Karen didn't bother to read any of the updated handbooks, she was unaware that this position had required a master's degree for many years now. I believe about 6 years. She supplied her lawyer with the original company handbook from 9 years ago, and he used that as a reference in his settlement demand. This was when we realized that she hadn't read any new handbooks in years. Since Karen rubbed a lot of people the wrong way, boss's sister-in-law decided to personally take on the case. Every letter Karen's lawyer sent, she sent back 3 times in length. Some of it wouldn't even really say anything, just wordiness, but it would certainly take Karen's lawyer a while to read it. And he did not come cheap. After several of these letters, they realize no settlement is going to happen, and they want to take it to court. It's a pretty cut and dry case. Boss's sister-in-law shows evidence that Karen has received all the updates via email. After the change was made and the handbook was sent out, HR even sent an email to Karen specifically letting her know that she was grandfathered in and doesn't need to worry, to which Karen replied, "Okay, thank you," confirming receipt of it. The best part was when boss's sister-in-law said that they couldn't break company rules to give Karen a job she was totally unqualified for while neglecting another employee who went above and beyond to get his master's degree to advance, as that would be unfair to all other employees. Karen now had a seriously huge bill from her lawyer for all of these letters and filing the case and so on. No job, no one she could list as a positive recommendation, and no degree. In the time she had been at the company, it had become industry standard to require a bachelor's degree, so she was effectively shut out of her career. It would also be hard to explain how you work somewhere for a decade and don't have a letter of recommendation from anyone there. If only she had read her darn emails. Sued my HOA. My lawyers destroyed HOA Karen in court. Click the video on your screen so you find out how, and I'll see you there.